Today's presentation frightens me because it is so important and the lessons are so powerful that I am frightened that I won't do it justice. And I'm not just saying that. We're going to be talking today about Absalom. And it's a very important history of Israel that's filled with lessons for us that tell us important things about God. Now, just to give you a little background, in our last presentation, we talked about David's great sin and great repentance. But even though he was forgiven and he repented, there was a judgment that had been pronounced at the time when he said, "I am the man." You remember he sinned with Bathsheba, took Uriah's wife, then conspired to have Uriah killed at the hand of the Amorites. And Nathan the prophet had told David, and David really pronounced a sentence on himself when David heard about this parable of a shepherd that stole his neighbor's one lamb when he had flocks of sheep. It says, David's anger was greatly aroused against the man, and he said to Nathan, "As the Lord lives, the man who has done this will surely die. He will restore fourfold for the lamb because he did this thing and because he had no pity." And we later understand through Nathan that David was pronouncing judgment on his own house. Because of his bad example and because of what he had done, he would lose 4 sons. He had taken the life of Uriah, and Uriah never had any offspring with Bathsheba. So David was forgiven, but the consequences of his sin had not gone away. Now, one of the most tragic things about his bad example is the kids watch very carefully what the parents do. The youth may complain about their parents, but they will be certain to imitate them. And you've heard before that the 3 most important ways to teach your children are example, example, example. Good or bad, they will follow your example. And I am always frustrated when I find that I am reproducing my parents' example in my life. The very things I said, "Oh, I will never do that with my kids." You find yourself imitating your parents. I remember one time I was with one of our boys, and I was going to have a car alarm installed in our car. I was a little worried because we had to park it down there at the public parking at the San Francisco airport during a trip, and it was going to be there for a week or 10 days, and I thought someone was going to maybe steal something and put an alarm in it. Got to the electronics store where the alarm I wanted, they said, we don't have it in. We're not going to get it in time. And I said, "Oh, well, can you give me some car alarm stickers I can put on the window? So at least it'll say I've got an alarm until I can buy the alarm." "All right, that's fair enough." So they gave me some stickers. I put it in the car and driving along, and son said, "Dad, that's not honest. You're advertising that your car is alarmed, and it's not." I had no good answer. They watch little things like that. They never forget. I remember once seeing my dad. My dad had millions of dollars. We went to a sailboat store to buy something, and I saw my dad go over to one of the model sailboats, and he popped out this brass pin that went into the rudder board because ours was missing. He just stuck it in his pocket and winked at me. I never forgot that. He was telling me stealing's okay. And what do you think it did to David's sons when they saw their father, when he wanted something, when he felt some passion for something, just take what you want. Didn't matter how wrong or immoral it might be, and that now played out in his family. Go in your Bibles to the 2nd book of Samuel, chapter 13, and here's where we take up our story. After this, it says Absalom, the son of David. Absalom was the second born, I believe, of David's sons. Absalom, the son of David, had a lovely sister whose name was Tamar. She was very pretty. And Amnon, the son of David, Amnon is the firstborn. Now, they have different mothers. He fell in love with his stepsister, Tamar. And he was so distressed that he became sick He was lovesick. He was infatuated. Every time he saw Tamar, he thought, what am I going to do? She's my sister, but I've got to have her. I've got to have her. And he became preoccupied with that. And I'm not going to read the whole thing. I don't have time to go through all 6 chapters with you. And some of it's not pretty. But he lied. He created a scenario. He tricked her into coming into his room under the pretense of making food for him. He said he was sick because he thought someone was trying to poison him because he was the firstborn. He's the crown prince. But if you just make me some food, I know you're my sister, it'll be safe. And that sometimes happened back then. And so she came into his house and she's making food. Says, could you bring it to me into the bedroom? She didn't know what's going on. She was a virgin, one of the king's daughters. Matter of fact, she's the only daughter of David listed. And she comes in to bring him the food, and he takes her by the hand, says, sleep with me. She realized what's going on. She says, my brother, don't do such a terrible thing. I'm your sister. And she pleads with him. He won't listen. Being stronger than she is, he rapes his sister. And then, almost as bad as what he had done is what happens next. Then he says, he becomes disgusted with her. Now she's lost her virginity. You could actually marry a stepsister in Bible times. And then he kicks her out. She says, now what you're doing is worse. And the Bible says, if you look in 2 Samuel chapter 13, verse 15, Amnon hated her exceedingly, so that the hatred with which he hated her was greater than the love with which he had loved her. And Amnon said, arise and be gone. He had his servants ultimately kick her out and lock the door behind her. This is just terrible. This is happening in David's household, and it's springing from his bad example. Now, finally, she covers her head. She cries. She tears her garments. She's wearing a coat of many colors like Joseph. It was a sign of royalty, and the king's daughters wore that. But Absalom saw her mourning with dust on her head, and he knew that his brother had been infatuated. He said, has Amnon been with you? So don't say anything. Don't trouble yourself, sister. I will take care of it. She ended up living out her life in her brother's house. She moved in with her brother. There's no record that she was ever married. And Absalom didn't say anything to anybody. Word got back to David, but instead of David punishing Amnon, he thought, how can I punish Amnon? Everyone knows what I just did. See, he had lost his ability to judge. He had lost his ability to take action because of his bad example. You know, that's always a challenge for every Christian, is you want to share your faith with others. You want to be able to preach. If you're not living something in your life, you find it hard, without being a terrible hypocrite, to share it with others. So not only is your bad example hurting you, your bad example hurts your witness. And you want to be living the life so you can faithfully proclaim the truth. So David doesn't do anything. All it says is that when David hears about it, verse 21, I'm in 2 Samuel 13, he was very angry, and he stormed around, and he fumed, and he stopped, but he didn't do anything. Absalom waited for David to do something to vindicate what had happened to his sister. Nothing happened. He wasn't banished. Nothing happened. Absalom said, okay, Dad, if you're not going to do something, I'll do it. He lets 2 years go by. He figures Amnon probably thinks, he didn't say good or bad to Amnon. He probably thinks everything's okay. And then Absalom tricked his brother. He was having, the sheep were being sheared. You remember the story of Nabal when they were sheep shearing? It was a feast. And at the feast, there was a lot of generosity. And Absalom invites David, he invites all the king's sons. Come, we're going to be shearing sheep in my ranch out in the country, and we're going to have a feast, and you're all invited. And Amnon, you come along too. Amnon thinks, oh, he's forgiven me. Everything's okay. So he goes, and everybody goes, and Absalom tells his servants, and this is verse 28. He commanded his servants, saying, watch then now, when Amnon's heart is merry with wine, and when I give you the signal, strike him, kill him. Do not be afraid. I've commanded you. Be courageous. Be valiant. I'm going to be the crown prince after Amnon's gone. See, he's got another reason to kill Amnon. Absalom has ambitions about being the king. He's lost respect for his father. He's also very proud. And so they're all partying. And he gives a signal, and his servants just totally, out of the blue, assassinate his brother. And then they, with Absalom, they flee to Gerar, which was, see, David married the princess of the king of Gerar. It's the country over by where they used to have Decapolis. It's on the east of the Sea of Galilee. It was sort of the region of Syria. And David married to create an alliance. He married a beautiful daughter there. And he and the daughter had beautiful children, Absalom and Tamar. And so Absalom goes back to his king grandfather with his servants, and they stay up there. He's sort of self-banished himself, kills his brother Amnon. Now David's lost 2 sons. And first he thought he lost them all. Word came from the feast. They said, there's been a slaughter and all your sons are dead. And so for a couple of hours until he found out that it was only Amnon that was dead, the king thought, he was terribly devastated. He thought all his children had been slain. And so now Absalom is out of the kingdom. And David is realizing that he brought this all on himself. And so he is pining now the loss of Absalom. And he's missing him. So this is the time when Absalom is, he's banished, but something happens where he is reconciled. Joab can see, David can't focus. His general notices that David, and Joab's also his nephew, David's going around from day to day, and he's moping, and he's not judging the people, and he's not doing his work, and maybe not fighting the battles, and he's just grieving for his son. He's lost the baby, Bathsheba's first baby. Now he's lost Amnon because of his bad example in part. Now he's lost Absalom because Absalom's gone out of the country, and he was next in line to rule. And David is moping around. Joab says, look, you got to let him come back. No, I'm not going to bring him back. He says, he's killed his brother. How can I bring him back? So Joab comes up with a plot. He calls a very wise, shrewd woman of Tekoa. Gets someone from out of town that David won't recognize. And he gives her a script. And she comes before the king. King is the Supreme Court. She says, I got this case. You've got to hear it. Your Majesty, please help me. He said, what ails you? She said, I'm a widow. I've got 2 sons. And my 2 sons fought together. And in the fight, one killed the other. It got out of hand, and one killed the other. And now the rest of the family is saying, I need to turn over the living son so he can be executed, and I'll have no posterity, no one to take care of me. My light will be put out. No name for my husband. And he said, okay. Your son will be forgiven. Now, it's very clever. Joab's put this all in her mouth. And then she goes on and says, now, can I say another word to you? What about the king's son that's been banished? Why don't you forgive him and bring him back? There was an argument between the 2 boys. You're telling me that my son would be forgiven, but what about the king's son? And the king says, did Joab put you up to this? David's pretty smart. And then one of the very great statements in the Bible that so many people miss, that is in this passage, the wise woman of Tekoa. Here's what she says to King David. If you have not underlined this in the Bible, underline it. 2 Samuel 14:14. 2 Samuel 14:14 is a great verse. For we will surely die and become like water spilled on the ground that cannot be gathered up again. Yet God does not take away a life, but he devises means so that his banished or separated ones are not expelled from him. I'm going to read that again. That's a great verse. That's a verse for you. For we will surely die. You know, we're all marching towards the grave. And become like water spilled on the ground that cannot be gathered up again. We're not coming back in this life. Yet even though God does not take away life, but he devises a means, he's got a plan, so that his banished ones, we're separated from God right now because of our sins, are not expelled from him. We can come home. Isn't that a great verse? It's got the whole plan of salvation in there. God has devised a plan so that his banished ones will not be separated from him. David then, brokenhearted, he gives word to Joab, okay, I saw what you're up to. Tell Absalom he can come back to the city, but there's got to be some consequences. He can't see my face. Tell him to go to his house. So Absalom comes home. He is reconciled. Well, at least he comes back to the city, but there's a period of time when he doesn't get to see the father. And so eventually Absalom starts to get frustrated. A couple of years go by, and he's in the city, but he's not in the palace. And he thinks, look, we got to get past this hurdle if I'm ever going to be king. And so he dwells in Jerusalem, and now I'm in chapter 14. He dwells in Jerusalem, verse 28, 2 full years. He does not see the king's face. Finally, he sends to Joab, and he said, look, tell the king, I want to see you. Joab ignores him. He said, look, I got you back home. That's good enough. He says, look, I want to talk to you. He ignores him. Absalom tells his servants, go, his field is by my field. Go set Joab's field on fire. That'll get his attention. So Absalom's servants do what he says. They set Joab's field on fire. Joab comes storming over to Absalom's house. He said, what have you done? You burnt down my field. A field of grain or something he was growing. He said, look, I told you, you brought me back. I was living like a crown prince back in Gerar, and here I'm home, and I'm kind of a house prisoner. What good is it? I can't go to the palace anymore. And he said, go talk to the king. So Joab says, all right. So finally he works it out, and he goes to David, and David sends for Absalom. He comes in, he bows himself to the king. The king kisses him, means you're fully forgiven, you're restored. Don't we all want the kiss of the king? And you know the story where Esther goes in before the king and he holds out the scepter, and it's a sign of forgiveness. And so Absalom now has been restored to his status, his treachery against his brothers forgiven. But you know, you can't really blame him. He raped his sister. So now Absalom takes his plan to the next step. You see, if you haven't figured it out yet, Absalom wants to be king. And if you go to chapter 15, you can read here that it's telling us Absalom begins to live large. He's been restored to the kingdom. 2 Samuel 15, verse 1. It happened after this that Absalom provided himself with chariots and horses and 50 men to run before him. Now, if you know anything about the Bible and the Jews, horses were kind of reserved for battle. Riding them around the city was largely for show. You'll notice that the other king's sons, it says, got on their mules. And later in the story, Absalom is riding a mule. They were a lot more practical in that country than horses. And so he's got horses and chariots. He got 50 men running before him. And you know what that means is the king, sometimes as the king went from place to place, he would have a team of soldiers that would prepare the road, and they'd run before him so that his chariot wouldn't hit any bumps. They'd fill in the low spots, and if there were rocks in the road, they'd knock down the high spots, and they'd create an even plane, and they had switches in their hand. They'd say, make way for the prince, make way for the prince. And so Absalom would ride around. He's got these 50 soldiers, and I remember seeing the vice president of Cameroon, Africa, when I was there years ago. And he was going down the street, and I looked out my hotel window, and I saw the limousine going, and he had security guards, and this is on the equator, and they are dressed in black suits. And they're running in the sun, and there's 8 on the right and 8 on the left of his limousine, and they're all armed, and they got their sunglasses, and they're running along the side of the limousine. I thought, boy, that's a job I don't envy. Running in a black suit by the equator in the sun. And so here he's got these servants, but he's creating a greatness. And he starts to live large, as you would say. He's got his chariot, and he's making a pretty good show. And it goes on to say, and he was also a very attractive young man. He was proud, and he's beautiful. 2 Samuel 14:25. It tells us, in all of Israel, there was no one who is praised as much as Absalom for his good looks, from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. Now I want to stop. Does that term, sole of the foot to crown of the head, come to your mind? Other places? What happened? What did the devil do to Job? From the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, he's covered with boils. What does Isaiah say sin does to us? He says there's no soundness in them. From the sole of the foot to the crown of the head, they're only full of wounds and bruises and putrefying sores. Talking about sin and what it does to us. But here, Absalom is beautiful, but it's an outward beauty. And he is flawless. You know, most people look in the mirror and they think, I wish I could be different, but I wish my nose was a little different. It's fun. The people in Hollywood that are worshiped for their looks if you interview them, they're all insecure about some aspect of their appearance. Every one of them. And but Absalom, he is perfectly symmetrical. He is handsome. He is talented. He is young. He is strong. He's got everything going for him. But he's being destroyed by pride. What brought down the devil? Thou hast said in thy heart, I will ascend to heaven. It says, you are beautiful. Ezekiel 28, talking about Satan. You are the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You are perfect in your ways from the time you were created till iniquity was found in you. Your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. You've corrupted your wisdom by reason of your brightness. Pride will make you do dumb things. And he was so full of himself, and he saw everybody praising him, and they'd bow before his chariot, and they'd come to worship him, and he started thinking, I should be king. David he's not the giant killer he used to be. I should be king. And he begins to conspire. He can't wait now for David to just die and give him the throne. He thinks, he might give it to one of my brothers. Maybe he'll give it to Abigail's son, Daniel. You never hear about him. He actually was in line before Adonijah, but it doesn't seem that Abigail's son ever had any aspirations for the throne. She was, by the way, a good woman, and he never got in trouble like the other boys. But Absalom begins to want David's position, but like the prodigal son who can't wait for his father to die, he says, give me my inheritance now. He can't wait for his father to die. He says, I want the throne now. So he begins to conspire to kill his father. Now, do you know there's only one example I can think of in the Bible? Homicide is if you kill a humanoid. And infanticide is to kill an infant. Patricide is killing a parent. And there was so much honor in the Bible for parents. There's only one example I can think of in the Bible where anyone killed their parents, and it was the sons of Sennacherib. The Sennacherib, who was the Assyrian who surrounded Israel in the days of Hezekiah. Hezekiah prayed, and God sent his angel and killed 185,000 Assyrians. And Sennacherib who had been mocking the God of Israel. He went back while he was worshiping his God in this pagan temple. His sons killed him. Absalom is very odd in that he actually, if you disrespected your parents in the Bible, you could be stoned. Forget about killing them if you disrespected them. So the idea that this young would think to kill his father, it stands alone in the Bible. But if you haven't got it by now, who does Absalom symbolize? Satan. Who else was beautiful? Proud. Creation of God that wanted to destroy his creator. And you can find that the very thing that happened in heaven is what was being acted out now in the kingdom of God on earth. And so he began to work. He was cunning. And he started to sow seeds of discord. You read in 2 Samuel 15, moreover, Absalom would say, he'd go to the city gate where people would come and they'd want to talk to the king, and they'd bring their cases to the king. They'd say, I've got this case and I can't get to the Supreme Court. The king is not hearing my case, or there's nobody set aside for the king. And Absalom said, well, tell me about it. They'd come to bow to him. He'd lift them up. He'd say, oh, no, don't bow to me. Come, let's talk about it. Oh, then he'd say, if I was king, I'd take care of you. If the king would only appoint me or somebody. And so it was whenever anyone came near to bow down to him, he would put out his hand and take them and kiss them. And in this manner, Absalom acted towards all of Israel who came to the king for judgment. They're coming to see David. They're being diverted by Absalom. So Absalom acted towards all Israel. And so Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. What do you steal? You steal something that doesn't belong to you. Their loyalty should have been to the king. He's stealing their loyalty through cunning. He's campaigning in a very clever way. Anyone that comes to him, he says, oh, your case is good. It doesn't matter what their case was. He always said, your case is good. I'm on your side. You deserve justice. Slaps them on the back, blows sunshine, tells them what they want to hear. They said, well, Absalom's a great guy, good looking. I went to pray to him, and he hugged me, gave me a kiss. And he does this for years. Because, one by one, the people come. They bring up a report. Boy, that's son. I tell you, who should really be king? It should be Absalom. He's got all the best, And so he's planning something that was not God's will, obviously. He's a type of the devil. You read in Proverbs 6:19 about the things that the Lord hates. 7 things the Lord hates. You know what the worst is? It says, a false witness who speaks lies and one who sows discord among brethren. Isn't this what Lucifer did? He went throughout heaven and he began to tell the angels, we don't need God's law. We'd have more freedom. We'd have more power. God makes these other creations in his image. We can't procreate like humans. That's not fair. And the devil, he began to say, if I was God. Now, was the devil beautiful? He could sing. He was smart. He was strong, powerful. And what happened here with David's kingdom happened first in heaven. If you want to get a picture of what went on there, you could look at what happened here. Something else you learn about Absalom, I'm just going to throw this in. Absalom does all his dastardly deeds through his servants. The devil does most of what he does through the fallen angels that followed him. Notice 2 Samuel 13:28, Absalom commanded his servants to kill Amnon. 2 Samuel 14:30, Absalom commands his servants to burn Joab's field. 2 Samuel 15:10, Absalom commands his servants to announce he's king, to join him in rebellion. All along the way, Absalom has his servants that are following. They burn, they rebel, they kill. And the devil, he has minions. Satan's cast out of heaven with his angels. So finally, it turns into an all-out rebellion. Absalom goes to his father. He's just under the pretense of worship. He says, Dad, I made a vow years ago. And by the way, there's something in your Bible, if you didn't catch it. It says after 40 years. Some of you will have a translation that will say after 4 years. It's a little thing. I don't know, maybe I shouldn't have even mentioned it. This goes on after 4 years. The Septuagint, Josephus says 4 years. Some of the manuscripts they use for the King James Version, of course, 4 and 40 are also similar in Hebrew. And they thought it was 40, and that doesn't make any sense to the story because it wasn't 40 years of doing this. It was 4 years after he comes back this happens. So after 4 years of this, 2 years he doesn't see the king, 2 years he campaigns. Finally, he tells his father, I made a vow back when I was in Geshur, and I promised I'd go to Hebron and pay this vow. I promised if I could just see your face again and be restored to you. And the whole thing's a lie. It's all a ruse. He says, can I bring some of my servants? We'd like to go, and we're going to celebrate a feast there in Geshur. And David says, sure, I'm so happy about your new spiritual interest. And what he does is the whole thing is a conspiracy. It's a coup to overthrow his father. And he takes these soldiers with him, and he has spies go out throughout the kingdom, and they all blow a trumpet, and they all shout, Absalom reigns in Hebron. Now, where did David first reign? Started at Hebron, then went to Jerusalem. He's now saying, I'm going to do the same thing. Hebron was like the spiritual center. It's where Abraham was buried. So it had great significance. So they blow the trumpet, and with great excitement, they say, Absalom reigns. Well, this came at a time where David's reputation was at a low point, and that Absalom's reputation was at a high point, and you would have been shocked at how quickly everyone took up the restraint. This king they once loved, they used to sing when David went down the street, David has killed his 10,000s, and now they're ready to kill David, because for Absalom to reign, they know that means David's out. Didn't they once sing for Jesus? Hosanna. A week later, they said, crucify him. People are fickle. And so the conspiracy began to get strong. A messenger who's loyal to David comes running into Jerusalem. And he said, Absalom is reigning in Hebron, and he's getting his troops together. David, realizing he needs to evacuate with those who are loyal Jerusalem. And someone might wonder, here's David, the giant killer. He's never lost a battle. Why is he retreating and allowing Absalom to take Jerusalem? Why did God allow the devil to hijack our world? Couldn't David have stood and fought? He could have, but there would have been a bigger fallout and loss of life. the city of Jerusalem would have been destroyed. And Jesus did not allow the battle of the devil to take down the city of God, the New Jerusalem in heaven, his dwelling place. So David retreats. He allows Absalom to carry on his rebellion. He doesn't want the city where the ark is. Matter of fact, the priests begin to follow David out of the city where the ark is. He says, no, take it back. If God's with me, he's with me. I don't need the ark. So keep it safe in the city. And he takes his family and his soldiers, and they flee, and something very interesting happens. I want you to look in 2 Samuel 15:30. David now goes up the sides of the Mount of Olives, and he weeps over Jerusalem. Did Jesus, the son of David, weep over Jerusalem? So David went up by the ascent of the Mount of Olives, and he wept as he went. His head was covered, and he went barefoot. And all the people who were with him covered their heads, and they went up, weeping as they went. Now he's got most of his other children and his family and his wives. He left 10 concubines to help keep the house. That'll come up in the story in just a moment. And so while David's on the Mount of Olives and he's weeping, Jesus was on the Mount of Olives weeping. Along comes a Benjamite by the name of Shimei. Now Shimei was he was a scoundrel. There are other words I could use, but I can't. He just had a bad attitude. All these years that David was king, Shimei resented that Saul was not still king. Shimei was from the tribe of Saul. He says he took it. He called David a bloody man as though he had assassinated Saul. David didn't do it. And Saul killed himself. And so here he's saying, go out, you bloody man. He's throwing rocks at David on the Mount of Olives, and David's soldiers are there, his bodyguards there. And they said, who in the world does he think he is? And he's kicking dust, and he's saying, you're getting what you deserve. You're a bloody man. He's cursing him. And Abishai, you always remember Abishai. He always wants to kill everyone. Abishai wanted to kill Saul, and he said, let me go cut off his head. Who is this dog? He's cursing the king. And David does something very unusual. He is so meek, he said, let him curse. Maybe God will turn it into a blessing. He said, what am I to do with you, sons of Zeruiah? Zeruiah was David's sister. This is Joab and Abishai. He said, my own son is seeking my life. Why shouldn't this Benjamite curse me? What is that? He's throwing rocks and cursing. My own son wants to kill me. Let him curse. Does the Lord often stand back and let the wicked rave? He lets them curse. Could David have destroyed Shimei in an instant? He could have sent his soldiers right up there. They were fast. They could have killed him. He doesn't. Isn't God patient with the lost? Even those who are under judgment, he bears along with them. And so he said, look, I'm going to let him curse. So then Absalom comes into the city of Jerusalem. The conspiracy is growing strong. What's really sad is some of David's friends and counselors now join Absalom. They go. David thought, I thought you were my friend. You were really going with whoever was in power. And one of David's chief counselors was a man by the name of Ahithophel. Now, Ahithophel was brilliant. Ahithophel is also the grandfather. He's the great-grandfather of Solomon. So the genes were there, if you didn't know that. Ahithophel is the grandfather of Bathsheba. Ahithophel maybe doesn't like David because of what happened with Bathsheba and David messing up her marriage to Uriah, but for whatever reason, he now sides with Absalom. And he knew Absalom would succeed as king if Absalom had listened to his counsel. But it wasn't of the Lord. The best laid plans of men. And when David finds out that Ahithophel is counseling Absalom, he thinks, oh, this is not good. Ahithophel, it says, the counsel of Ahithophel was as though a person had inquired of the oracles of God. It was as though God had spoken when Ahithophel spoke. He was that smart. And so David prays a prayer. He says, Lord, confound, frustrate the counsel of Ahithophel. Right after David prays that prayer, David's friend, the Hushite, he comes to David and he says, I'm your friend. He was close, the kings had friends and they had counselors, and this was the king's buddy. And he says, you're not going to do me any good here. He says, why don't you go back into the temple and make like you're supporting Absalom in his rebellion, and you can let me know what's going on there. Maybe you could do something to frustrate the counsel of Ahithophel. He said, I'm your true friend. I will go. And so Hushai the Archite, he goes into the city. Absalom said, I thought you would have fled with your friend. He said, whoever the Lord chooses, that's my friend. That's who I'm loyal to. And he meant that. He knew the Lord had chosen David. He had never anointed Absalom. And so Ahithophel gives some despicable counsel to Absalom. He said, look, you people need to know that there's no more reconciliation. You killed your brother once and then he left. They've got to know that's not going to happen again. And he said, you need to burn the boats, as they say. And he says, you need to go sleep with your father's harem. What does a woman represent in prophecy? You got these 10 concubines keeping the house. It says, so they pitched a tent for Absalom on the top of the house, on the roof of the palace. Where did David first spy Bathsheba? They did it in a public place where everyone would see. They pitched a pavilion up there, a tent. And he went into the harem. It doesn't mean he necessarily went through all the business with everybody there, but it was symbolic that he was now taking the wives, that he would be defiling them. What does the devil want to do with the law of God? How many commandments are there? Aren't they to be lived out in the church of his people? And so there's some symbolism here, I believe. Was it foretold that this would happen? You remember among the curses that were going to come on David for his bad behavior, Nathan the prophet said, behold, this is 2 Samuel 12:11, I will raise up adversity against you from your own house, and I will take your wives before your eyes and give them to your neighbor. The word neighbor there means someone very close to you. And he will lie with your wives in the sight of the sun. It'll be done. It says, you stole Uriah's wife and you tried to do it secretly. I'm going to do this thing for the whole world to see. This is the fulfillment of that prophecy that his wives, his concubines anyway, were given to his son, someone close, in the presence of everybody. And now folks said, all right, there's no more reconciliation now between Absalom and David. We got to choose sides. And so then he gets some more counsel from Ahithophel. Ahithophel says, now what you need to do is you need to let me take the best men in Judah, the best men left in the kingdom, the soldiers. Right now, while David and the family are running before they get to the Jordan River, they're tired, they're scattered, you know, Hitler was successful in the beginning of World War II because of what they call the Blitzkrieg. They understand one of the most important things in a fight is the element of surprise. This has all taken him by surprise. You need to strike right now. That was actually good counsel. It probably would have worked. He said, let me go right now and take him out. Don't risk yourself. Don't get on the battlefield. And he's about to do this. He says, well, let me ask Hushai, the king's friend. He was also a counselor. What does he think? Hushai realizes, boy, if they do that, David is done for, because they are tired. You read in the story, they had to stop and rest. They're exhausted. They weren't prepared. David's going barefoot. And he said, you know, Ahithophel's counsel is not really good right now. Absalom's listening to Hushai the Archite's counsel. And he said, everyone knows that David is a mighty man, and he's a shrewd man of war, and he's probably hidden in a pit, and you're going to go fight, and there'll be a big battle, and you're not even going to get David because he's hidden somewhere. Remember all those years he hid from Saul? Saul couldn't find him. You think you're going to find him right now? He's too shrewd for that. And his soldiers, they're men of war. And if a battle takes off, they're going to strike some of the people. Word will get out. There'll be a panic. He said, no. He says, you got to do this right. He says, you're the new king. You don't want to leave out the northern tribes. You need to get everybody, all the tribes involved. You need to personally lead them into battle so that they'll see that you will be your king, their king after this victory. And then Absalom, he likes it. You have me, white horse, lead him. I'm the new king. I said, and you'll gather them like the sand of the sea, and you'll descend on them while they're tired and weak, and just kill the king. And so he says, well, you know what? The counsel of Hushai is better than the counsel of Ahithophel. And that's exactly what they wanted. He wanted to give David time to get across the Jordan River, so they can get organized, so they could get resources for the soldiers, and they could organize and plot a battle. And then you read what happens next. It tells us that this friend, Ahithophel, this close friend of David, betrays him. Who ate from his bread betrays him. Have you read in Psalm 41? Even my own familiar friend, in whom I trusted, who ate my bread, has lifted up his heel against me. Did Jesus have someone that lifted up his heel against him, that ate bread with him? What was his name? And when Judas' plan backfired, see, Judas didn't know Jesus would be killed. Judas thought when he sold Jesus that Jesus would then use his power to make himself king, and that he'd end up thanking Judas. His plan backfired. And as a result, Judas went out and took his own life, and he hung himself. When Ahithophel finds that his counsel is not going to be heeded, he already knows how it's going to end. He goes home. Listen to this, 2 Samuel 17:23. When Ahithophel saw his advice was not followed, he put his household in order, got the lawyer, made out his will, and hanged himself and died. Ahithophel ended the way Judas ended. Judas threw down the pieces of silver, and he went out and did the same thing. Now finally, Absalom takes the counsel. They get all of Israel together, and they prepare for a great battle, and they begin to go towards, David has actually gone across the Jordan to Mahanaim, and there's a fortress there where Saul actually used to reign. And the kingdom of the Saul's sons was across the Jordan there. And it's a fortified city. It's a place where he can stage a battle. He gets the soldiers together. Food is coming and resources to David and his army. And Absalom gets all of Israel together. David divides his army into 3 parts. Have you read Revelation? How it seems like the battle is divided into 3 parts. And of course, you got the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. David wants to lead them out into battle, and they said, no, you're not going, not on your life. David's soldiers said, you are worth more than 10,000 of us. If 10,000 of us perish, it won't mean anything to them. They're wanting you. They want to kill you. Absalom will quit as soon as you're dead. He doesn't want to slaughter among the soldiers. Is Jesus called the fairest of 10,000? The lily of the valley, you know that song. Actually comes from the Song of Solomon. And so he tells all his soldiers when they're going out to battle, he's got them divided up, and he tells them all, as they're going out, as the parade is going out to meet the forces of Absalom, he says, please deal gently with the young man, even Absalom, for my sake. Don't forget he's my son. The understood is fight, win the battle, but don't hurt him. Take him alive. Well, that's kind of discouraging to some of the soldiers, because here he's trying to kill David. They're going to put their lives on the line. They know if they kill Absalom, the war is over. That's who they got to kill. But he is so concerned for his son. Just look at the love of David for his son. Even though his son wants to kill him, he still loves him. Does God love those who took the life of his son? We can't comprehend that kind of love. So they are engaged in the battle. And the Bible says that they meet the soldiers of David near the woods of Ephraim. And in the midst of the battle, there's great chaos, because instead of fighting on the field of battle, it's a battle in the woods. And the Bible record is more were slain by the woods than by the soldiers. They're running into trees, and they're falling off of cliffs, and their horses are breaking legs, and in other words, it just means that the obstacles, David's men knew how to fight in any environment. Absalom didn't know how to fight. You know, I remember I downloaded this free book once on an airplane. I was bored, and it was an ancient writings of an ancient Chinese general. I don't even remember what it's called. But it gives the rules of war. I thought, well, maybe there's some spiritual lessons in here. Some of you know the name of the book? The Art of War. It's some ancient Chinese general. And then one of the most important things he says, make sure you get to choose the terrain for the battle. And of course, you always want the high ground. And Absalom chose poorly. And David's soldiers knew how to use the various terrain against them, and they drove them into the woods, and the woods ended up destroying more men than the sword did. And in the battle, it says that the servants of Absalom met the servants of David. The entourage around Absalom finally encountered the soldiers of David, and he turned to run. And as he's riding on his mule this time, not on his horse anymore, as he's riding on his mule, he looks over his shoulder evidently. They're riding through these oak trees, and he turns back just in time to be clobbered by an oak, except his head gets stuck with all his massive hair. Did I read the part to you about Absalom would cut his hair every year and it weighed over 3 pounds? And he's like Fabio, this beautiful long hair. Beautiful, strong, and I resent him already. And it ends up being his undoing, just like Samson. And he's riding through the woods, his neck gets caught in the crotch of a tree, his hair gets tangled up in the oak, and the mule rides out from under him, and he's left hanging between heaven and earth. And he's still alive. And one of the soldiers sees him. They're in the middle of battles. One of the soldiers runs to Joab and said, I saw Absalom. He's hanging in the woods from a tree. And Joab said, well, did you kill him? He said, I wouldn't kill him. He said, I would have rewarded you. He said, I don't care how much you give me. You heard the law of the king. He says, I would have been betraying my own life if I touched him. So Joab said, I'm not going to argue with you. And Joab now, he was still, he burnt his field. He reconciled him to the king, and here he thanks him by rebelling like this. Joab is really mad. Joab takes 3 darts in his hands, and he goes and he stabs Absalom in the heart, and Joab and 10 soldiers around him. How many? Absalom defiled the 10 concubines. Joab with 10 of his armor bearers around him. Not only did he stab him with 3 darts in the heart, then they said they slew him beyond that. I don't know what else you could do beyond that. But these 10 men, there's a judgment. And you see that number 10. For every commandment you break, there's a corresponding judgment. And then finally, word gets back to David. And 2 messengers are fighting over the privilege to bring the news to David. And you've got this Cushite who's running with a message. One of the sons of the priest, he said, let me bring word to the king. Joab said, no, we've got a messenger going. He said, let me go. And finally says, you can go. And he outran the official messenger. And he wants to prepare the king because he knows the king is going to be brokenhearted when he hears about Absalom. He knows the king. And the king sees him coming. And the first thing, the messenger says, praise the Lord, the king is victorious. And the first thing out of the king's mouth is, what about Absalom? Well, he knew that was coming. And he said, well, there was a tumult. There was a battle, and I didn't see exactly what happened. And he's trying to prepare the king and brace him for the bad news. And then finally the Cushite gets there, and he said, what about Absalom? That's the only thing on the king's mind. What about my son? And he answers by saying, may all the king's enemies be as that young man is. And the king collapsed. David basically implodes when he gets this news. And in one of the most poignant phrases in the Bible, and this is now, I'm in 2 Samuel 18:33, the king was deeply moved. And he went up to the chamber over the gate. There's a staircase that leads up to the watchtower over the gate. And he wept as he went. He's going one step after another, and his moans are echoing out off the stone walls for all to hear. They hear it reverberating, oh, my son, Absalom, my son, my son. If only I had died in your place. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son. And you go to chapter 19, verse 4. The king covered his face, and the king cried out with a loud voice, oh, my son, Absalom, oh, Absalom, my son, my son. That's pretty heartrending, isn't it? And see the king weeping over the son. Would God I had died in your place. Now, do you see the gospel in this story? Now, there's something deeper here I don't want you to miss. Don't just look on the surface of this story. It is true, Absalom, in one sense, he represents this beautiful fallen angel that rebelled against God. God made him. God loved him. God is love. He was good at one point, but he went bad. He went wicked. But beyond that, don't forget that Absalom is the son of David. He is the beautiful son. He is the flawless son. And that son dies hanging from a tree suspended between heaven and earth. How does Jesus, the son of David, die? Were there 3 nails that pierced him? David is saying, would God I had died for thee. I would have died in your place. Didn't Jesus, the son of David, die in our place? And you know, it tells us that David ends up losing 4 sons. Maybe next week we'll talk about Adonijah. Now he's lost 3 sons, one in his innocence, a baby. Amnon is slain at a feast. Absalom dies suspended, hanging from a tree like Jesus. All the sons of David that died tell us something about Jesus. I remember one time I had a friend that he was at a drive-in theater. He got into an argument. Someone pulled out a gun. His name was Kenny. And he went to jump out of the way when this young man started shooting, and he jumped into the path of the bullet, and it went in here, and it came out here. And he was still conscious. He said, get me to the hospital. And they took him to the hospital, and he was on life support for several days. We were there at the hospital. He was eventually pronounced brain dead. We were staying with the family in their house. There wasn't room for everybody because so many people had come while we were waiting to see what was going to happen with Kenny. And all the bedrooms were full. And that night I slept on the floor in the living room. And the father couldn't sleep. And he would sit in the living room, and I would see his cigarette glowing. Anytime I woke up during the night, I would see him sitting there with a cigarette glowing. They ultimately needed to disconnect his life support, and I was in the hospital when Kenny died, and to see the meltdown of the father. And then I was in the house, in the living room, and during the night, I would be awakened by this sound that was almost inhuman. It sounded like a cry, and it sounded like an animal. And I just heard Kenny's father let out this strange moan. And I just realized it was coming from a broken heart. And whenever I read the story here about Absalom, of course, we've lost a son. And I hear him just say, there's no words for it. All you can do is say, oh, my son. It would hurt less if I died for you. And you know, this is what God says. It would hurt me less if I died for you than to lose you. What can separate us from the love of God? Have you read that verse there in Romans? Chapter 8, verse 38. For I'm persuaded, Paul says, that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height or depth, nor any created thing is able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. You think it's safe to say that Jesus loves us? Jesus our Lord? You know, if you look in the Psalms of David, there is a psalm. It's called Psalm 3. And it says, the Lord helps his troubled people. A psalm of David when he fled from Absalom. Even during this time, you can find there's an inspired psalm of David. Ultimately, Joab comes to David, and all the soldiers are coming back victorious. They've laid down their lives to save the kingdom. And all they hear when they come back rejoicing. They're all slapping each other on the back. We've won the battle. They get near the city. They hear David moaning. Oh, Absalom, my son, all night long. He's moaning. Joab gets back. And you have to admire Joab sometimes. And he does the right thing. He did the right thing in killing Absalom. And he goes up and he tells David what he needs to hear. He said, do you not regard princes or soldiers or generals? He said, all of your servants have laid down their life to save the kingdom and to save you. And we now get the feeling that if we had all died and Absalom had lived, you'd be happy. He said, you need to get out in the city gate now, and you need to get your act together, and you need to thank and praise and encourage these soldiers that have saved your wives. And what about your other children that we've saved? He tells him what he needs to hear. That's a good friend. And David does. He pulls himself together and he sits in the gate and he thanks the people for saving the kingdom and saving the rest of his family and saving the city. And eventually now, when he left Jerusalem, David told people, like the concubines, he said, I'll come back. I don't know when I'm coming back, but I'm coming back. There's an evil power, there's an evil, rebellious prince that has taken the kingdom, but I will come back. Has our king told us he's coming back? Is Jesus called the devil the prince of this world? And he's rampaging around, he's driven by pride. And Jesus said, I will come back. And David came back in glory. He came back as king to Jerusalem. Jesus is coming back, and he's going to be the king of the New Jerusalem. But you know, the most beautiful thing in this story is the message of God's love for us. God so loved the world. You know why the word so is there? You could have left out the word so. God loved the world, and he gave his son. But the word so includes a word that is almost the same in every language. It's the word oh. It's like when David said, oh, Absalom, my son. And God so loved the world, he gave his son. That's how much God wants to save you. But he cannot force you to be saved if you are determined to rebel. All of us, either we surrender like David to God, or we rebel like Absalom. There's only two roads. We either do our own thing, we say, I will be king, or we worship God as king. And we're one of the two. There's only two masters. It's Christ or Satan. And Jesus laid down his life to show his love for you. Do you think you could love him back? Do you want to serve him?